For the past weeks, we examined both the foundations of ethics and the context in which we do Christian ethics. Now, we turn to how we make ethical decisions. Throughout the history of the Christian Church, there have been essentially three main ways or motives of formulating ethical norms and making moral decisions. Number 1, deliberative motive. Number 2, prescriptive motive. And number 3, relational motive. We will look at these one by one and critique each one. First, let's take a look at the deliberative motive. Deliberative motive argues that reason is seen as synonymous with divine revelation. For some Christians, reason is the source of moral judgments, and Christian ethics is subsumed under the rubrics of philosophy. For others, reason and philosophical reflection are employed to serve theological commitments. The deliberative motive rests on the assumption that reason can be a moral guide because God has implanted a natural law within human consciousness that all can comprehend. Many find this approach helpful for several reasons. Number 1, it speaks to all people, not just Christians who accept divine revelation. Therefore, it is assumed that it has the potential to extend Christian ethics beyond the boundaries of the church. Number 2, it is argued that neither the Bible nor Jesus provides everything we need in order to make ethical decisions in the modern world. Many of the issues we face are not even indirectly addressed in divine revelation. Therefore, we must supplement with reason. Number 3, many find it appealing to do ethics in accord with what is natural within the world and human nature. Who are the proponents of deliberative motive? Number 1, Thomas Aquinas in the Roman Catholic Church. Aquinas was a 13th century theologian who is best remembered for synthesizing the philosophy of Aristotle with Christian thought. At the heart of his work in bringing together Christian theology with Aristotle's philosophy is the belief that the truths of faith and those of sense experience are fully compatible and complementary. The deliberative motive in Aquinas' thinking is particularly evident in his discussion of law. He believed there are 4 kinds of law that have an intimate relation to one another: eternal law, natural law, human or positive law, and divine law. The eternal law, it is founded in God's wisdom and very being. It is not a law independent of God, but is the eternal source of all reality, including all other forms of law. Natural law. Natural law is a process by which we gain self-evident principles that guide us in the practical realities of everyday life, including the moral life. All things toward which humanity has a natural inclination, in accordance with the laws of nature, are apprehended by this practical reason. Human or positive law. Civil laws, according to Aquinas, are to be consistent with natural law, but they are framed not for any private benefit, but for the common good of all citizens. Divine law. The explicit law of God in the Old and New Testaments. This law constitutes the portion of God's designs and truth that cannot be known by reason or natural law. Aside from Aquinas, we also have the modern Roman Catholic thought. Aquinas' use of natural law became a mainstay in Roman Catholic moral theology. All moral decisions could be made on the basis of reason because all humans could discern both the natural end of any human endeavor and the moral legitimacy of any human action. For this reason, traditional Roman Catholic thought held the same moral standards for all individuals in all nations, meaning there was no moral dualism that distinguished the ethics of the Church from the ethics of the world. Another one is the Protestant version of deliberation. Among Protestant ethicists, the deliberative motif has usually taken the form of placing Christian norms in philosophical categories. Adolf Harnack is one of the prime thinkers of modernist or classical liberal theology, and for him, the Christian moral norms of love and mercy were central and could be expressed in philosophical language. Reinhold Niebuhr employs that reason is important in understanding the concept of sin. Niebuhr argued that the ethical ideal of love could never become a reality on earth, especially in its social and structural dimension. Christian love is the impossible impossibility that judges all human actions but can never be used in idealistic function to make ethical decisions for corporations, institutions, and nations. Another one is C.S. Lewis. He is a good example of this approach because he believed there is a natural law that can guide the general behavior of people, but has the particular role of pointing them to their own condition before the need of God. Let us critique the deliberative motif. Number 1, we must note the Bible's affirmation that God's design can be known by nature. For example, in Romans chapter 1, the apostle argues that God's wrath against unrighteousness is legitimate. Why? For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, His eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things He has made, so they are without excuse. Romans chapter 1 verse 19 to 20. A second positive aspect of deliberative approach is that it rings true to the experience of people throughout history. Human beings seem to have a rational or at least intuitive sense of the reality of transcendence and some cognizance of God's moral designs. Murder, adultery, theft, lying, cheating, and injustice are almost universally condemned as violations of something that is innately precious to men and women. The third problem is the lack of clear agreement concerning the content of natural law. Even if we postulate that there is a natural law and find some advantage in this approach as an apologetic tool, we are faced with the difficulty of finding agreement on the norms and virtues that can be discerned by nature. It is therefore easy to end up with minimalistic ethic. Such an ethic stands in stark contrast to the rigorous ethic of the New Testament, which compels believers to take up their crosses and follow Christ. Clearly, we may employ reason as we sort out the opinions, norms, and virtues relevant to a given ethical situation and discern how to apply them. But that is different from a pure deliberative ethic that rests only or primarily on reason for its norms and moral guidance.